At this point, Jane Roe mentioned that she wanted to talk to Biden, but unrecorded. Jane Roe had been in the local psychiatric and substance abuse center that I could pinpoint with a quick Google search, since Biden did not bother to redact this detail at best, or maliciously kept it in at worst, for an attempt to end her own life, and things were still not good at home. If only Jane Roe had the opportunity to speak to a psychiatrist at the community college, or even a counselor, she might have been made to see that the institution was not the right place for her, lamented Biden. I'm sure none of the psychiatric professionals where Jane Roe was hospitalized could possibly have thought of discussing her course load and plans for the future with her. Of course, they could never be as clever or as dedicated as someone paid by the community college. After all, even though many productive members of society, including professionals like doctors and lawyers, or salt-of-the-earth blue-collar workers, can be high-functioning despite serious psychiatric diagnoses, Jane Roe simply did not have the academic skills to achieve beyond pre-tech level. She just kept signing up for classes and then failing them for a myriad of reasons. After all, Jane Doe was emotionally fragile and could not possibly have handled the stress of attending school. After all, Biden herself, with no apparent psychiatric training, said so. I mean, Biden's institution might have had an open admissions policy, but surely that doesn't mean that everyone can attain a college degree. So, I wanted to review Kent Hovind's doctoral dissertation in detail. Well, actually, I wanted to discuss whether discussing his doctoral dissertation without his prior permission would constitute fair use, or whether I would be entitled to show it in full. But in order to do so, while actually adhering to fair use, I wanted to compare and contrast it to those of other well-known Christian apologists, and William Lane Craig was the first name that came to mind. Unfortunately, I could not find a copy of Craig's dissertation online, not surprising considering that it was offered before the advent of the internet. There was also the issue that Hovind offered his dissertation for an unaccredited doctorate in Christian education as a specialization, rather than a generalized doctorate in philosophy. So not having previously been aware of the nuanced nature of Jill Biden's doctoral controversy, I decided to try and get hold of her dissertation as an example of what a dissertation in a similar field should look like instead. What I found was not something I could use as an example of an acceptable dissertation. I don't mean the occasional typo that I have since found out people have been complaining about. Nor do I mean the dissertation is less than 100 pages, excluding appendices, 85 pages to be precise. Less than that is to say only 66, if you exclude the literature review. Less than that, if you exclude the historical account that could have been interesting and useful if it was incorporated into the modern-day context better. I do not even mean the fact that calling it a dissertation is a stretch, because it does not present much in the way of original research. I can accept it as an executive position paper, and I can also accept that executive position papers, which analyze real-world organizational problems, may even be preferable to what might be considered traditional original research within the education field. And no, I don't give a damn about how much Joe Biden smiles. The poor data visualization could fill a video on its own. For now, I will just briefly refer to page 90. This represents the results of Biden's survey. She could have at least formatted the data into a table if she was unable to achieve better data visualization at doctoral level. Critique of her methodology, and sample selection in particular, could fill a whole other video. Biden's student interviews had a whopping sample size of 2. Compared to someone like Karen Kaiser, who reportedly interviewed 40 women with breast cancer for the dissertation she offered for a doctorate in philosophy from the Department of Sociology from Indiana University in the same year, and who reportedly started recruiting her research subjects 3 years before she offered her dissertation. No, the truly disturbing aspect of Jill Biden's doctoral dissertation is that it was apparently read by 4 PhDs and 3 EDDs, and that they awarded her a doctorate for it, rather than expelling her from the program for gross ethical violations. The confidentiality of research participants and qualitative research has been extensively addressed in sociology papers, after research subjects for Carol Ellis's Fisher folk reportedly felt humiliated and betrayed by that researcher. As being a small remote community, they could reportedly identify themselves and their neighbors in her research, even though the researcher redacted their names. But Biden did not even have the common courtesy of giving her research subjects the same consideration. Biden apparently used their first names, which I will be redacting here. However, this seems less egregious in the case of the faculty that she identified than for the 2 student participants, as Biden appears to have taken care to reflect the faculty and the institution in a mostly positive light, and did not share highly personal and highly sensitive details about any of their personal lives. But Biden offered her dissertation in 2006. Surely Biden just made an honest mistake. Actually, something that was common practice at the time. And this is just a sign of the changing times, an increased focus on privacy and #cancel culture. Except, Fisher Folk was reportedly published in 1986, 35 years ago. Ellis herself seems to have learned from her mistakes, and she reportedly published a paper on confidentiality in 1995. Several other researchers published extensive and authoritative papers specifically on confidentiality in the late 90s and 2000s. This would have been available to Biden if she cared to look. If there is any indication that Jill Biden has learned from her mistakes, please do feel free to link it in a comment below. It is unclear how anonymous, or not, Biden's surveys were, as she seemingly did not take the most basic precautionary measure to protect participants' confidentiality, namely redacting their names, expecting that she, as a person in authority over the people she interviewed, and with an apparent conflict of interest, would have taken steps such as hiring some independent third person to retype survey responses so that survey participants could not be identified by their handwriting, or gasp, heaven forbid, to conduct in-person interviews on her behalf, is almost certainly too much to expect. This might very well explain one member of the faculty's surprise that so many students would respond that they were being provided with the support they need when the faculty felt differently. Biden's dissertation, as obtained, states twice that Jane Roe asked her to not record the parts of the conversation that related to the attempt to end her life and the related admission to a psychiatric institution. Simply, Biden's manifest, observable behavior shows her to be an unethical researcher and a terrible human being, and I will not be calling her doctor either.